Have you ever looked at your life and asked yourself a hard question? The kind of question that makes you uncomfortable because it is too real, too honest, and impossible to ignore. Like, what am I really doing with my time? And why do I keep waiting for the perfect moment that never comes? Because deep inside you already know that time is moving. The clock is ticking. And whether you act or not, your life is being shaped right now. So welcome to English to Inspire, a place where you do not just learn English, but you also wake up to your own potential. And if you feel that something inside you is ready to change, then subscribe and stay with me. Because today we are going to walk through the life of Thomas Edison, a man who started with almost nothing and still managed to light up the entire world. And while you listen to his story, I want you to think about your own life, your own excuses, and your own dreams. Because this is not just about him. This is about you and what you are choosing to do every single day, even when nobody is watching, and even when it feels like nothing is happening. Now imagine being a child and already feeling different. Not in a good way, but in a way that makes people doubt you, question you, and even label you as someone who will never succeed. Because that was the reality for Thomas Edison when he was young, and the world around him did not see potential. They saw a problem. They saw a boy who did not fit into the system, who did not learn in the same way as others, and who asked too many questions. And maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you have been judged. Maybe someone told you that you are not good enough, or not smart enough, or not ready yet. And if that is true, then listen carefully, because this story is going to challenge everything you believe about your limits. And it will ask you a simple but powerful question. Are you going to accept what people say about you, or are you going to build something greater, something stronger, something that comes from your own effort and your own hunger? Because here is the truth that most people try to avoid. Success does not start with talent. It starts with responsibility. It starts when you stop blaming your situation, your past, your teachers, your family, or your lack of opportunities. And you begin to look at yourself and say, "This is my life, and I will do something with it." And that is not easy, because it means you cannot hide anymore. It means you cannot wait anymore. It means you must act now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. And as we move deeper into the story of Thomas Edison, you will begin to see that his life was not special. In the beginning, it was not perfect. It was not easy. But there was one thing inside him that made all the difference. Something simple but powerful. Something that you also have right now, whether you realize it or not. And that is the decision to keep going, even when things do not make sense, even when the results are slow, even when the world is silent. And that is where everything begins, with a decision that most people are too afraid to make. And as we continue, you will start to see where that decision first appeared in his life. Now think about this for a moment. What happens to a child when the people who are supposed to guide him start to doubt him? When the place that should help him grow becomes the place where he feels small, confused, and misunderstood. Because this is exactly what happened to Thomas Edison when he was still very young. And instead of being seen as curious and full of questions, he was seen as a problem, as someone who could not follow the rules, someone who did not learn fast enough. And in a traditional school system that rewards obedience more than curiosity, that kind of child often gets left behind. And maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you have been in a room where you felt like you did not belong, where people moved faster than you, where you started to question your own intelligence, your own value, and your own future. And if that has ever happened to you, then you need to understand something very clearly. The system is not always designed for your uniqueness. And that does not mean you are wrong. It just means you are different. Edison's teachers believed he was slow, and at one point, he was sent home with a message that changed everything. Because instead of accepting that label, his mother made a decision that most people are too afraid to make. She chose to believe in him, and belief is powerful. Because when one person truly believes in you, it can become the foundation for everything you build later in life. And she took him out of school and started teaching him at home. And this is where something important begins to grow. Because Edison was no longer forced to fit into a rigid structure. He was free to explore, to ask questions, to follow his curiosity without being punished for it. And that freedom became the fuel for his mind. And slowly, step by step, he began to develop something that many people never build, which is the habit of thinking for himself. But let me be direct with you, because this is where many people make a mistake. They hear a story like this, and they think the secret is finding someone who believes in them, someone who supports them, someone who pushes them forward. But what happens when you do not have that person? What happens when nobody claps for you? When nobody tells you that you are doing well? When nobody is there to guide you? Do you stop? Do you quit? Do you accept the label that the world gives you? Or do you create your own belief, your own voice, your own direction? Because at some point, even Edison had to rely on himself, even with his mother's support. The responsibility was still his. The effort was still his. The hunger was still his. And that is where your power is, not in what others think about you, but in what you decide to do with what you have. So ask yourself honestly, are you using your situation as a reason to grow, or as an excuse to stay the same? Because the truth is simple. You can have a difficult beginning and still create a powerful future, but only if you are willing to take control. Only if you're willing to learn in your own way. And only if you're willing to move forward even when the path is not clear. And as Edison's journey continues, you will start to see how this freedom to learn and explore begins to shape not only his mind, but also the way he sees the world and the opportunities around him. Now let me ask you something that might challenge you a little. When was the last time you decided to learn something on your own? Not because someone told you to do it, not because it was required, but because you felt a fire inside you. A real curiosity that pushed you to explore, to read, to try, and to understand more about the world. Because this is where the story of Thomas Edison begins to change in a powerful way. And it is also where most people start to fall behind. Because learning without pressure, learning without a teacher watching you, requires something deeper. It requires discipline. It requires hunger. And most of all, it requires responsibility for your own growth. And that is not easy, because there is no one there to tell you what to do next. There is no clear path. There is only you and your decision to continue. After leaving school, Edison did not stop learning. In fact, he started learning even more, but in a different way, a more personal way, because he began reading books about science, about experiments, about how things work. And instead of just accepting information, he wanted to test it. He wanted to see it with his own eyes. And that is a key difference that you need to understand. Because there are people who consume information all day, watching videos, reading posts, listening to ideas, but they never take action. They never test anything. They never build anything. And because of that, their knowledge stays weak. It stays passive. It does not transform into skill. And Edison refused to live like that. He turned knowledge into action, and action into experience. He even created a small laboratory at home, a place where he could experiment freely. And imagine this for a second. A young boy, not rich, not famous, not special in the eyes of society, but inside his mind, there was something growing, something strong, something unstoppable. Because every experiment, even the ones that failed, gave him more understanding, more confidence, and more control over his own learning process. And this is the part where I need you to be honest with yourself again. Are you just consuming, or are you creating? Are you just watching, or are you building something real? Because the difference between those two paths will define your future in ways that you cannot even imagine right now. And here is the truth that many people avoid. Self-education is harder than traditional education because there are no deadlines, no exams, no external pressure. And without those things, most people lose focus. They get distracted. They quit too early. They tell themselves they will start tomorrow. And tomorrow becomes next week. And next week becomes next year. And suddenly, nothing has changed. But Edison was different. Not because he was born different, but because he made a different decision. he decided to continue, again and again, even when it was boring, even when it was slow, even when nobody was watching. And that is the kind of mindset that builds something real, something lasting. So, as you listen to this, I want you to think about your own life, your own habits, your own excuses, because you have access to more information than Edison ever had. You have tools, you have resources, you have opportunities, but the question is, are you using them or are you wasting them? Because potential without action means nothing. And as Edison kept learning, experimenting, and pushing himself forward, life started to present him with his first real opportunities, the kind that tests not only what you know, but who you are becoming. Now, let me bring you closer to a moment that many people try to avoid in their own lives. That uncomfortable space where you start something, you try, you take action, and then things do not go as planned. Because this is exactly where Thomas Edison found himself when he began his first attempts to work and earn money. And at a young age, he started selling newspapers and snacks on trains, moving from place to place, learning not only how to survive, but also how to observe people, how to understand what they wanted, and how to create value, even in a simple way. And while this may not sound like something big, this is where a powerful mindset begins to form. Because he was not waiting for the perfect job. He was not waiting for someone to give him an opportunity. He was creating his own, step by step, even if it was small, even if it was uncertain. And here is something you need to understand clearly. Most people underestimate small beginnings. They think that success must start with something big, something impressive, something that others will notice. But that is not how real growth works. Because small actions, repeated every day, build something strong over time. And Edison understood this. Even if he did not have all the answers, even if he was still learning, he kept moving, he kept doing, he kept experimenting. And at one point, he even set up a small printing press inside a train car, where he created and sold his own newspaper. And think about that for a moment. A young boy creating his own product, distributing it, learning from real experience, making mistakes, adjusting, and continuing. This is not luck. This is initiative. This is responsibility in action. But let's not romanticize this too much, because the truth is, things did go wrong. There were accidents. There were failures. There were moments where his experiments caused problems. Even a fire inside the train that forced him to stop working there. And this is the part where many people quit. This is the moment where excuses become stronger than dreams, where fear becomes louder than action, and the easy path appears, the path of giving up, of saying it is too hard, of blaming the situation. But Edison did not stop, and that is what separates him from the majority. Not intelligence, not talent, but persistence in the face of problems. So let me ask you directly, what do you do when something goes wrong? When your plan fails? When your effort does not bring the result you expected? Do you stop? Do you complain? Do you wait for a better moment? Or do you adjust, learn, and try again? Because this is the real test. Not when everything is easy, but when things break, when things burn, when things fall apart. And your reaction in those moments will define your future more than any talent or opportunity ever could. As Edison continued to move forward, learning from each mistake, building experience from each failure, something inside him started to grow stronger, something that would later become one of his greatest advantages, an almost unstoppable drive to test ideas, to experiment without fear, and to push beyond what most people are willing to do. And this is where his journey begins to transform into something much bigger than just survival. Now, pay close attention, because this is the point where everything starts to separate, where an ordinary life begins to turn into something extraordinary, not because of luck, not because of talent, but because of a decision that most people are not willing to make. And that decision is to become obsessed, not in a negative way, but in a focused, disciplined, relentless way. And this is exactly what happened to Thomas Edison as he moved deeper into his journey. Because he stopped treating learning as something casual and started treating it as something essential, something that he had to do, something that became part of who he was, And when that shift happens, everything changes. Because you are no longer waiting for motivation. You are driven by something stronger, something internal. Edison began working with telegraph systems, learning how communication worked, understanding signals, wires, connections. And instead of just doing his job, he studied the system. He questioned it. He looked for ways to improve it. And this is a key difference that you need to understand. Because there are people who work just to complete tasks, and there are people who work to understand, to improve, to master. And those two paths lead to completely different lives. And the second path is harder, slower, and often invisible at the beginning, because nobody sees your effort. Nobody rewards your curiosity. Nobody pays you extra for thinking deeper. But that is exactly where the advantage is built. He would spend long hours experimenting, testing different ideas, failing again and again. But each failure was not a stop, it was a step. And this is where his mindset becomes powerful, because he did not see failure as something to avoid. He saw it as something necessary, something that brings you closer to understanding, closer to improvement, closer to success. And let me be honest with you, most people say they want success, but they avoid failure at all costs. They protect their ego. They stay in safe situations. They do not take risks. And because of that, they stay stuck, repeating the same patterns, the same excuses, the same results. Edison was building something different, something strong, because his obsession was not with the result. It was with the process, the daily work, the constant experimentation, the repetition, the learning. And this is where I need to challenge you again. What are you obsessed with right now? Is it comfort? Is it distraction? Is it easy entertainment? Or is it growth? Is it building something real? Is it pushing yourself beyond what feels comfortable? Because your focus will shape your future, whether you realize it or not. And here is another truth that you cannot ignore. Obsession requires sacrifice. It requires saying no to things that do not move you forward. It requires discipline when you feel tired. It requires consistency when you feel bored. And that is why most people never reach their full potential. Not because they cannot, but because they are not willing to pay the price. They are not willing to stay focused long enough to see results. But Edison stayed. He continued. He pushed forward. And slowly, his experiments began to move towards something bigger. Something that would test his patience like never before. Something that would require not hundreds, but thousands of attempts. And this is where his story becomes truly unforgettable. Now let me ask you a question that most people avoid because it makes them uncomfortable. How many times are you willing to fail before you stop? How many attempts are you willing to make before you say it is enough? Before you convince yourself that maybe this is not for you? Because this is exactly the point where Thomas Edison faced one of the greatest challenges of his life. And it was not a single failure. It was not a simple mistake. It was a long, exhausting process filled with repeated attempts that did not work. Again and again. And this is where his famous mindset was built. The mindset that most people talk about, but very few truly understand or apply in their own lives. Edison was trying to create something that had never been done in a practical way before. A reliable electric light bulb that could be used in everyday life. And the idea itself was powerful. But the execution was incredibly difficult because every small detail mattered. The material, the design, the resistance, the durability. And each time he tested a new idea, the result was the same. It failed. It burned out. It did not last. And imagine facing that kind of repetition. Not once, not 10 times, but hundreds, even thousands of times. And still choosing to continue. Still choosing to try again. Still believing that the solution exists, even when you cannot see it yet. And here is where his perspective changed everything. Because instead of saying I failed, he reframed the situation. He said that he did not fail. He simply found another way that did not work. And this may sound simple, but it is powerful, because the way you interpret your results will define your next action. If you see failure as the end, you stop. But if you see failure as information, as feedback, as a necessary step, then you continue. And that is exactly what he did. He turned each failed attempt into knowledge, into progress, into something useful. But let me be honest with you. This mindset is not easy to build, because every failure comes with frustration, with doubt, with pressure, and sometimes with people around you questioning your choices, your time, your effort. And at some point, you will feel tired. You will feel like stopping. You will feel like maybe this is too much. And that is where most people quit. Not because they cannot succeed, but because they cannot handle the emotional weight of repeated failure. And that is the real challenge. Not the work itself, but the consistency of showing up again after things do not go your way. So I need you to reflect on your own life again. Where are you giving up too early? Where are you stopping after a few attempts? Where are you telling yourself that it is not working, when in reality, you just have not tried enough yet? Because success is not about one perfect moment. It is about many imperfect attempts, repeated over time. And as Edison continued this process, as he pushed through the frustration, the doubt, and the endless testing, something began to change. Slowly, quietly, but powerfully. And that change would soon lead to a breakthrough that would not only transform his life, but also the entire world. Now imagine standing at the edge of giving up. After trying so many times that you lose count. After investing your energy, your time, your focus, and still not seeing the result you want. Because this is exactly where Thomas Edison found himself before his breakthrough. And this is the moment that defines everything. Not the beginning, not the idea, but the decision to continue when stopping feels easier, when quitting feels reasonable, when nobody would blame you for walking away. And yet, he stayed, he continued, he pushed forward. And this is where persistence transforms into something powerful, something that most people will never experience because they quit too early. After countless experiments, adjustments, and failures, something finally started to change. Not in a dramatic, instant way, but in a small, almost invisible improvement. A material that lasted a little longer, a design that worked a little better, a result that gave just enough hope to continue. And this is important, because breakthroughs rarely come as a big explosion. They come as small signs, small progress, small wins that most people ignore. And if you are not paying attention, if you are not patient, you will miss them. You will stop right before things start to work. And that is one of the greatest mistakes people make. They are closer than they think, but they do not realize it. And then, after so much effort, so many attempts, so much persistence, the moment arrived. A version of the electric light bulb that worked in a practical way, that could last, that could be used, and that could change how people live. And think about this for a second. One idea, one solution, built on top of thousands of failures, now had the power to bring light into darkness, to extend the day, to transform cities, homes, and entire industries. And this is the power of persistence. This is what happens when you refuse to stop, when you refuse to accept failure as the end. But let me bring this back to you, because it is easy to admire this moment. It is easy to look at the success and forget the process. But the real question is, are you willing to go through your own version of this? Are you willing to stay when things are slow? Are you willing to continue when results are small? Are you willing to believe when there is no evidence yet? Because that is what it takes. Not just dreaming, not just planning, but doing. Again and again, until something works. Edison's breakthrough was not just about the invention. It was about the mindset that created it. The discipline, the persistence, the refusal to quit. And once that door opened, everything began to expand. New opportunities, new challenges, new responsibilities. Because success does not make life easier. It makes it bigger. It brings more pressure, more expectations, and more demands. And as his influence started to grow, Edison had to face a new reality. One that would test not only his skills, but also his discipline and the way he managed his time and energy every single day. Now let me ask you something that most people do not like to hear. Do you really understand what it takes to maintain success after you achieve it? Because reaching a goal is one thing, but sustaining it, growing it, and handling everything that comes with it is a completely different challenge. And this is exactly where Thomas Edison had to evolve once again. Because after his breakthrough, after the world started to recognize his work, life did not slow down. It became even more demanding, even more intense. And this is where discipline stops being an option and becomes a necessity. Edison was known for working long hours, sometimes sleeping very little, fully focused on his projects, his ideas, and his vision. And while many people talk about balance, the truth is that during certain phases of life, especially when you are building something meaningful, balance is not always possible. There are moments when you need to go all in, when you need to focus deeply, when you need to sacrifice comfort, entertainment, and even rest. And this is not something that sounds attractive. This is not something that people like to share on social media. But it is real. And if you ignore this reality, you will struggle to move forward. He built laboratories, worked with teams, developed multiple inventions, and managed complex projects. And all of this required not only intelligence, but structure, discipline, and consistency. Because ideas alone are not enough. You can have the best idea in the world, but without execution, without daily effort, without organized action, that idea will stay in your mind and never become real. And this is where many people get stuck. They dream, they imagine, they plan, but they do not execute consistently. They do not build the habits that turn vision into reality. But let me be clear. This level of discipline comes with a price. Because when you focus so much on your work, something else is often sacrificed. Time with family, personal comfort, moments of rest. And Edison himself faced these challenges. And this is where you need to be honest with yourself again. What are you willing to sacrifice for the life you say you want? Are you ready to give up distractions, to reduce the time you spend on things that do not matter, to focus your energy on something that can actually change your future? Because without sacrifice, there is no progress. And without discipline, there is no consistency. And here is the part that many people do not realize. Discipline is not about feeling motivated. It is about doing the work even when you do not feel like it, even when you are tired, even when the results are not immediate. And this is where real growth happens, in those quiet moments where nobody is watching, where there is no applause, no recognition, just you and your commitment to continue. As Edison continued to build, create, and expand his work, he entered a new phase of life, one where success brought attention, competition, and criticism. And this is another level of the journey that most people are not prepared for, because when you start to stand out, not everyone will support you. Not everyone will celebrate your progress. And this is where your inner strength becomes more important than ever. Now let me ask you something that many people try to ignore. What happens when you start to grow? When you begin to stand out? When your work starts to get attention? Because at that moment, life changes in a way that most people are not ready for. And this is exactly what Thomas Edison had to face as his influence expanded. Because success does not only bring opportunities, it also brings pressure, criticism, and competition. And if you are not strong inside, if you do not know who you are and what you stand for, these external forces can easily shake you, distract you, and even stop you from moving forward. As Edison's inventions became more visible, he entered a world where other powerful minds were also trying to innovate, improve, and dominate the same space. And this created tension, disagreements, and intense competition. And while competition can push you to grow, it can also create stress, doubt, and conflict, especially when people question your methods, your ideas, or your character. And this is where many people lose focus. They spend too much energy trying to defend themselves, trying to prove something to others, trying to respond to every criticism, and in doing so, they lose the most important thing, their direction. Edison faced critics, rivals, and challenges that tested not only his intelligence, but also his emotional strength. Because when people attack your work, it can feel personal. It can create frustration. anger, and even insecurity. And if you are not careful, those emotions can control your actions. They can lead you away from your purpose. And this is why emotional discipline is just as important as physical effort, because success is not only about what you build, it is about how you respond to everything around you while you are building it. But let me be direct with you again, because this is where many people fail. They want success, but they are not ready for criticism. They want recognition, but they are not ready for pressure. They want to grow, but they are not ready to be challenged. And that is a problem, because growth and challenge always come together. You cannot separate them. You cannot choose only the good parts and avoid the difficult ones. It does not work like that. So I want you to reflect again. When someone criticizes you, when someone doubts you, when someone questions your path, what do you do? Do you stop? Do you get emotional? Do you lose focus? Or do you stay grounded? Do you stay focused? Do you continue moving forward with clarity and purpose? Because that choice will define your long-term success more than any skill or talent you have. As Edison continued to navigate this complex environment, balancing innovation, competition, and criticism, he reached a point where his story was no longer just about inventions. It was about legacy, about impact, about what remains after all the work is done. And this is where the final question begins to form. Not about what you achieve, but about what you do with your life as a whole. Now, we arrive at the question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And I want you to face it honestly. Not later, not someday, but now. What are you doing with your life? And what will remain after your time is gone? Because when you look at the journey of Thomas Edison, you do not just see inventions. You see impact. You see a man who decided, again and again, to use his time, his energy, and his mind to create something that would outlive him. And this is where everything becomes real. Because at the end, it is not about how busy you are. It is not about how comfortable your life was. It is about what you built, what you contributed, and how you used the days that were given to you. Edison's work helped shape the modern world, bringing light into darkness, creating systems that changed how people live, work, and connect. But none of that came from a perfect beginning. None of that came from easy conditions. It came from decisions, small decisions, made daily, to continue, to learn, to try, to fail, and to try again. And this is where you need to stop looking at his life as something distant, something unreachable, and start seeing the pattern, the behavior, the mindset, because that is what you can apply. That is what you can control. That is what can change your reality starting today. But let me be very clear with you, because this is where excuses lose their power. You already have enough information. You already have access to tools, to knowledge, to opportunities that people in the past could not even imagine. And yet, many people stay stuck. Not because they cannot move, but because they choose not to move. They wait. They hesitate. They overthink. They delay. And while they are doing that, time is passing. Opportunities are passing. Life is passing, and nothing changes. And that is the real risk. Not failure, but stagnation. So I ask you again, and this time I want you to feel the weight of the question. What are you doing with your time? Are you building something? Are you learning something? Are you moving forward? Or are you staying in the same place, repeating the same habits, telling yourself the same excuses, hoping that something will change without action? Because it will not. Change requires movement. Progress requires effort. And results require consistency. This is your moment. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now, you have the ability to start, even if it is small, even if it is imperfect, even if nobody notices, because every big result begins with small actions repeated over time. And if you truly understand this, if you truly accept this, then your life can begin to change in a way that is real, not just in words, but in results, in growth, in direction. The world is waiting for you. Don't let them wait any longer. Stay strong.